And so good morning and welcome to this Jersey Chamber of Commerce Hustings online with the constituents from St Clement. I'm delighted to say that we're joined by 5 of the constituents, not appearing but standing. You'll find that we have Mark Boliat, who is representing Jersey Alliance, and Karen Wilson, an independent, not with us today, but in fairness, I mentioned them. If you're watching this, then you'll find that there is a little Q&A box at the bottom. You're more than welcome to put your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to weave those into the conversation we're about to have in the next hour and 15 minutes. The main purpose of the husting is to give Chamber members, the 600 businesses who employ 35,000 of the 62,000 people employed in Jersey, the opportunity to look back and to find out what their possible candidate vote is going to get them. So let's get ourselves underway and start with a 2-minute round robin from those who are with us. And on my screen, we'll start with Ken Addison first. Ken, your 2 minutes.
Okay, so for those I've not met before, I'm Ken Addison. I'm standing as a Reform Jersey candidate for the parish of St Clement, where I've lived with my wife Linda for over 30 years. Since I retired, I've been active in the parish, working with the support team, delivering Christmas food parcels, taking parishioners to doctor's appointments or up to the hospice for respite care. I work with a local charity called Christians Against Poverty, who help islanders who are struggling to make ends meet and to help them budget better. Before the pandemic, I, with my Pets Therapy dog Milo, used to visit the Little Sisters of the Poor, bringing some comfort to those residents in that home. More recently, I've worked with the newly formed St Clement Infrastructure, Housing and Environment Committee, and we successfully lobbied the Environment Minister to have 5 fields removed from the Bridging Island plan, which were proposed for redevelopment as housing. I'm passionate about protecting the few green fields that we've got left in St Clement, and I would like on Wednesday, the 22nd of June, for the parishioners to vote for me. And the reason for that is that together we can make Jersey a fairer place to live. Together we can prepare it for the challenges that it will face in the future. And a reformed Jersey government will be more accountable, more accessible, and more democratic. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. I'll let you know 2 seconds to spare, but I'm not going to give them back to you. Thank you very much indeed. Appreciate that. Ken Addison, the first of our constituency candidates for St Clement. Barbara Ward, going to come to you next. Barbara, your 2 minutes.
I'm Barbara Ward, and I'm standing as an independent candidate for St Clement. Before I came to Jersey in 1979, I trained as a registered mental health nurse. And then in Jersey, I did my general nurse training. I've also gained a master's degree in health, and I've held a number of roles in health, from student, sister to matron, and then senior manager. And I've lived in St Clements for the past 33 years. My concerns are about health. I'm very concerned about the state of healthcare in the island, staffing, about the new hospital project. I also feel that we should be having an independent inspection into by the UK Quality Care Commission. Also scrutinise the plans for the new hospital, and it's clear it won't meet the island needs. I'm looking at a 2-site. One is Overdale as the non-acute and rehabilitation, and then we actually refurbish the general hospital as the acute and emergency site. From a population point of view, I think we need to curb immigration via work permits or some visa control for essential skilled workers, but that would be across all sectors. You know, we're looking at hotels, etc. We need better financial management by stopping this borrow and spend mentality. want to look at about the double taxation on Social Security. Look at raising the threshold for what 2020 means. So middle earners can actually enjoy the personal tax allowances, which we can't enjoy now. From a housing point of view, I think we're actually tied into the 4,600 units, but from the census, which showing that there's over 4,000 empty units. And I feel that we need to actually focus on them first, and that when we do have properties, that they need to go to local people. We need to put a stop to outside investors setting up Jersey companies and going around the back door of actually coming in and buying a lot of these properties that are for sale. And this is just inflates all the prices.
I've muted you there, Barbara, for a reason. I've muted you at that point, just on the grounds of fairness that we were running over, and you've gone over your allotted. You can unmute yourself if you wish to. But I've got to keep it as fair as I can. But thank you for your 2 minutes there. Appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. As I go in a clockwise direction, Philip Balash, you will be next. So up with your 2 minutes when you're ready, sir.
Candidates have been presented with several opportunities in this election to explain themselves with a limit of 2 minutes. It's quite a difficult task without descending into generalizations. Yet if you go into detail on one topic, there is a risk that people might think that you are a one-trick pony. So let me say that all the policies of the coalition of the Jersey Liberal Conservatives and Progress parties are in our manifesto, which is on our websites. It is not very long, and I hope that people will find time to read it. That is what we stand for, and our promises to the electorate, if we are elected and manage to form a government, are all there. I will not try to summarize it here. What are the differences, though, between the policies of the parties and the independent candidates? The independents have myriad different positions, but it is possible to articulate the differences between the positions of the political parties, and if there were more time, I would do so. Let me just say that there is one important difference between my coalition and the Jersey Alliance, and that is that the Jersey Alliance does not believe that the OneGov structure has much wrong with it. The coalition believes that it lies at the root of much that has gone wrong in the last 4 years. OneGov was meant to save money. I was at a chamber lunch when it was all explained to much enthusiasm. All that has gone sour. In the last 4 years, the number of civil servants has gone up by 800 at an additional annual cost of at least £100 million. The balance of authority between the civil service and ministers has become skewed. Parts of the civil service are no longer really under any political control. This is wrong, and if we are elected and in government, we will put it right.
Again, impeccable timing there from you. Thank you very much, Philip Balash, for yours. A subject that I fear, or not fear, that we'll be coming back to, party or independent, maybe something to talk about in a little while. Next up, unmuting himself in just a second, because he knows how to do that sort of thing. We go to our next candidate, Alex Curtis. Alex.
Thanks, Mark. I am Alex Curtis, and I'm going to start with the realm of positivity that Jersey can be fantastic for business. I was 21 and still at university when I started Lecoq Distillery in a shed in my parents' house in St Clement. But after 2.5 years of red-eye flights from the UK where I was living to do 3 days of distilling, I realised that actually Jersey was a place I wanted to create a home and permanence, and not least because I knew that it was a place I wanted to base my business. And I've been very fortunate that my day job at Microsoft has allowed me to work remotely. So Jersey's got many strengths for business, like its proximity and its connection to each other. When applying for a production license, I was able to meet the customs department in person, schedule various departments to come and visit my distillery, and receive approval in a matter of months rather than years as it would have been in the UK. Our producers, like our farmers, fishers and coffee roasters, are never more than half an hour from their consumers. But there are challenges. The price of freight in and out of the island adds to costs. Islanders and businesses are finding it harder to access government services in person or in ways that suit them. Access to commercial space is limited and expensive. and the challenge of hiring and importantly retaining staff is getting more difficult as the cost of living makes Jersey an unattractive place for people to stay or move to. So we must address the cost of housing, as we cannot support a diverse and resilient economy if our islanders who work in all industries from construction to hospitality to care cannot, after a hard day's work, return to a home that is comfortable and affordable. So what role will government play here? Well, I want to see a government that takes action on real and sensible policies, that acts as an enabler for diversification and innovation in the economy, but that plays its part in ensuring commercial practices and markets are fair to businesses of different sizes and industries through light touch but focused regulation where needed. And of course, what I focused on today is about business, because this is a Chamber of Commerce event. But I want to make sure all people listening hear that I'm here to represent all parishioners and islanders and help bring improvements to support all aspects of island life.
Alex, thank you very much indeed. Alex Curtis with his 2 minutes. And finally, in the 2-minute round, we go to Lindsay Ash. Lindsay, your 2 minutes when you're ready.
Thank you, Mark. I was born in London. I've lived in St Clement for the last 22 years, and I am the current deputy of St Clement. My career started in London as a financial futures broker, which largely involved wearing stripy jackets, waving my hands around and shouting. Unfortunately, in 2000, the millennium year, the market was computerized and they didn't require people to shout and wave their hands around. And I came to Jersey and worked in the finance industry for the best part of 18 years, the last 12 years of which at South African Bank trading foreign exchange. Since I have been in the States, which has been a great honor, I have to say, to represent the people of St Clement, and even just to be in this State Assembly has been a fantastic honor. I've served as Assistant Treasury Minister, Assistant Home Affairs Minister, and on the panel of the Planning Appeals Committee. So I've covered quite a wide gamut. I was one of the main people instigating the Spend Local card, which was hugely successful at a very difficult time for the island. And I have managed to get the competition regulator to look into alcohol pricing on the island, which has provided a rather damaging report, in fact. As far as St Clement is concerned, I've managed to secure disabled parking at FB Fields. I've helped people with relatives in prison. It's a varied role. I've even conducted about 3 or 4 quiz evenings in La Hock for the Battle of Flowers Association. So I hope I've proved my worth both in the Assembly and in the parish, and I would like people to view me favourably to be re-elected. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindsay Ash. The shortest of all the speeches, noted. Maybe this is the way we're going forward. Thank you all very much indeed for your 2 minutes. We have some questions coming in, but I wanted to, and I'll come to the question that Lee has posed in a moment, because housing is certainly something I think has got mentioned in most of the round robins, and certainly from the community of Jersey Chamber of Commerce. That is one of the areas that they would like us to ask questions on. So we'll come to that in just a moment, but I just wanted to touch, as I'd noted, that we have 3 political parties represented here and 2 independent candidates. That I wanted to try and drill down a little bit into why, if you're with a political party, you chose a political party, and what do you think that adds? And if you are an independent, why you didn't join a political party? What do you think it offers being an independent? And I just think that as an opener and a more of an insight into yourselves, that would be a good way to start. So I'm going to start at this time with Alex as an independent. Alex, an independent, were you tempted by any of the political parties, or were you always insistent that you wanted to be an independent candidate?
I'm pretty insistent, but in a positive way, about independence in Jersey government. And I don't see right now that the argument being put up by parties that it will be the only way to get things done is the only way. I'm more than happy to work across whoever gets elected into the States Assembly, whether they be in parties, whether they be independents. But for me, the ability to stand up for the values that I understand and I want to represent in the parish and the island comes number 1, and I haven't seen a good enough reason to stand with the party.
All right, Alex, thank you for that. Lindsay, you will have heard Philip Ballish say some difference there between your party and his, not saying it's his party, but the party that he's in. What are your thoughts on this? I mean, you've been very pro-political party, you're in a political party, it was no secret. What do you think that it offers being in the political party?
I actually formed the party Jersey Alliance together with Roland Hewlin and Gregory Guida. So we were newcomers to the States Assembly. You've sat there yourself, and you know, and I think it's one of the reasons so many people only do one term, that as an individual, it's not always easy to achieve anything with the Assembly. The executive under the rule has to be in a minority. If you look at the two governments that achieved the most in the United Kingdom, for instance, it's and people might not agree with either of those two governments, but they were the governments of Tony Blair and Margaret Thatcher, purely because they had a good, healthy overall majority, and they were able to do or put in place the policies that they'd pledged. This doesn't work when you're an individual. You can promise whatever you like, but it's very, very tough to deliver it. I managed to do so on the alcohol pricing and price promotions, but it was a slog to do, and it's still resting with the Attorney General now 4 years later. So it's not an easy path, but as a party, if you have 10 or 14, if you reform have proved that, you have a much bigger say. We didn't get as many candidates as we wanted. We wanted to have 25 or 30 and really have a go at being a much bigger chunk. But we did get round to where we represent people in every single parish on the island. And I think we have an island-wide, or offering the people to vote for us island-wide, which no other party is.
I've got a supplementary question, Lindsay, that I just want to put to you on this, and it probably saves someone else saying it. You're regarded very much as the party of the existing government we have. Is that a yoke around your neck, or is that a benefit?
It's being used as a yoke around our neck, because obviously we don't really have a chance to be on a question time forum where you list the achievements of this government, which are substantial in many ways. Some people might not like them. This government has probably done more in 4 years than any other government, some of it forced on it through COVID. But if you listed all the things that have been done, including building and taking down a hospital in 6 months, it's been quite substantial. But it's been used as a sort of derogatory term towards us. It's not correct, obviously. Even if you took the Council of Ministers at its peak, it only had 5 Jersey Alliance people in it, 7 weren't. And of course, when the Assembly voted the current Council of Ministers in, the Jersey Alliance Party did not even exist. In fact, Reform had a person on the Council of Ministers, and it's not always put forward as a Reform-led government. Thank goodness.
All right, I wanted to I think it was fair to ask that question.
Yes,
Ken,
perfectly fair.
Ken, to you, with a political party and a newcomer into the political arena, why Reform?
So when I decided that I was going to stand for the States, I spoke to 3 people whose opinions I greatly value. One was a previous States Minister and Education Minister. Another one was a former Procurer of St Clement, and the third was the gentleman who set up Christians Against Poverty. I explained to them my views, and their suggestions were unanimous. If you stand as an independent and a first-time politician, your chances of making a difference and putting forward your proposals, you will succeed in no respect whatsoever. You will simply sit on the back benches and warm a seat. Their advice to me was to find a political party who had policies with which I agreed. So I looked at the Jersey Alliance Party. I looked at the Reform Jersey Party and found that Reform reflected my views quite well. I had several meetings with the management committee, put forward my CV, had a formal interview with them, and was successful in becoming a Reform Jersey candidate.
Ken, thank you very much. Barbara, you're the last in this question round on this. So as an independent, and again, we do note that 2 other candidates in this constituency, Sir Mark Beaulieu and Karen Wilson, not with us today, but as an independent, Why independent for you? You've negotiated from a union level in your past, and standing as an independent, you weren't tempted to join a party.
No, certainly not. It didn't actually enter my head to align with anybody else. I've lived in St Clement's for 33 years. I feel very, very close to our community. And it's about it's the parishioners in some ways that actually set the agenda. It's about their voice. It might be that I'm a lone voice, but when you look at all the other manifestos, we're all actually saying the same. A lot of the island issues are very, very similar. There's more commonality than differences between all the parties. But I wanted to be accountable and responsible to the parishioners, not to a party's manifesto and have to stick to it or be told you have to vote in this way, that way. It's about voting on behalf, in the House, on behalf of St Clement's parishioners. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
That was me and my bad
Okay.
of not unmuting myself, which is a rare occurrence, let me tell you. So let's go to some of the subjects that I know I was asked to raise with you, and dig a little deeper on the housing crisis. And I did raise with the current minister at a chamber lunch. In fact, it made the headlines at the time. Housing crisis. What housing crisis? And caused an awful lot of discussion thereon as to whether we have a housing crisis. The question from Lee Madden, and I'll interweave this into what I wanted to ask: with the increasing housing crisis for our resident population, what will you commit to in accommodating the transient workforce that is in the island and will be increasing in the coming years? Will you consider looking at implementing temporary worker accommodation or any policy for that to address the problem, which is further impacted by the loss of lodging housing accommodations to developers? There's no doubt about it, from a Chamber of Commerce, from an economy perspective, we need skilled workers. We don't have enough skilled workers within our own island to provide for the services that we provide. Businesses are finding it increasingly difficult to do this. They can recruit off island when they can get licenses and permissions to do so, ever complicated by Brexit and the work permit system. That is even more complicated by the fact that if they can get people here, there is nowhere to house them. Therefore, we do have a shortage of staff right across the board. So recruitment, population, will come to those, but housing is one of those strands. So how do we solve housing and the housing crisis for our locals and for our transient workers? It's a big question, and we're not going to be able to obviously get all of the answers today, and within probably 2 days of debating will be allowed. However, we must start somewhere. I'm going to start with Lindsay Ash on this first. Lindsay, if I can come to you, please. What are your thoughts on the housing crisis and how do we solve it? Because we are in a really, really difficult position at the moment. The economy is being damaged.
I think there's already steps being taken to solve it by putting the supply in place. If you look around St Helier now, there's a lot of cranes up there doing an awful lot of building. Should we gain a foothold in the Assembly as the Jersey Alliance, we will move Andium's target from 3,000 to 5,000. When we look at temporary accommodation for workers, I fully agree that we need it. It was Roland Hewlin, again an Alliance member, brought a proposition to the States that we should build some temporary accommodation just there for 4 years with a bedroom, a wardrobe, a shower, toilet, and that's it. And it would be reasonably priced. The States rejected it because the States are very good at forecasting problems. They don't want solutions. I think there were only 4 or 5 of us that voted for that. We do need to put in place permanent accommodation for temporary workers. To an extent, we've already done that with Hugh Court for nurses and junior doctors. Has been completely refurbished, but we need to focus on more of that sort of accommodation for various sectors of the community.
Okay, let's move to Philip Balash. Accommodation and housing is nothing new. It's been around for an awful long time. but we are getting to the very sharp edge of this right now. So how do we solve this?
The problem of housing is a problem of supply and demand. It's an economic rule that if the demand exceeds the supply in an excessive way, then prices go up and you have a problem. And the only way in which you can resolve that is by dealing with both ends of the problem, by trying to increase the supply, as Lindsay says, and I think that is happening at the moment, and also by restricting supply. And ironically, Brexit has had a marked effect on restricting demand. I would not have voted, I'm afraid, for temporary accommodation for a transient workforce, because it's not a temporary problem. It's a problem that's going to be there for a long time, and we need to find a permanent solution to that problem, which means I think that the government has to encourage the building of accommodation for all kinds of different workers. Thinking of social workers, so we have a churn of social workers, which is really terrible for the children who are in care. And one of the problems that they have is the inability to find accommodation. So helping workers to find temporary accommodation, I think, is something which ought to be within the government's remit.
Thank you. Alex Curtis, with due respect to every one of our candidates here, you're probably closer to halls of residence in memory than the rest of us. But I just wonder if that thought of halls of residence style for temporary transient workers is something you find attractive. And in terms of housing crisis, and let's be honest, St Clement is the second most densely populated of all the parishes in terms of numbers for size, 4.2 kilometres squared and nearly 10,000 people.
Yeah.
So how do we solve this housing crisis and how do we keep the economy ticking over?
Yeah, so to tackle that last one first and the first one last, I think the comments about supply demand are grossly simplified. I don't think the numbers show that we have a massively growing population versus a massively growing housing stock. Supply demand, like any commodity traded, can have a lot of different influences, whether it be people who are land grabbing or commodity grabbing or whatever market it is, beyond just a pure supply versus a demand. We've got to look at the suitability of the housing stock we have and whether we've seen a challenge in building far too many one-beds, creating overheating in the two-bed section. And we've got to look at whether the investment market and actually investors looking into investing in it as a form of getting no capital gains on property have been creating an inflation, because the numbers would point that this is not a build and live-in challenge. If buy-to-let purchasers or developers can purchase a property far easier than someone tied to a mortgage, we are bound to see challenges with first-time buyers and locals getting on the property market. And to the second part, how do I feel about halls of residence? I don't currently see a way that can be implemented that respects the quality of life that we would want anyone to live in Jersey, and in such a way that it would be. I could only see that working in a sense where there was the model of providing that was housing as a service and not for profit. The moment we look at smaller units, we look at lodging houses. Lodging houses can be advertised when they do go up for sale at a 9% return by the number of rooms and the cost against the freehold. And I think that we would see the same with the halls of residence, a grossly profitable item that actually doesn't go to serve that a far smaller unit should cost a far smaller amount. So perhaps some people would like to live in smaller units. I propose that the minimum standard is increased, but until we can work out how to take the challenges in the market that those who would build and own those units could be taking far too much out of the system compared to the value that we want to provide to people who would be living in it, I couldn't support that.
Okay. So we talk about supply and demand, and we'll come back and talk more about the demand in terms of our economy in a couple of minutes' time. Ken Anderson, I beg your pardon. Ken, your thoughts on housing, including that of temporary accommodation for transient workers?
So Reform Jersey has a housing crisis plan, a copy of which is on our website, which if we are able to influence the next government, we will give to the appropriate civil servant and ask them to action that straight away. Currently, a developer building 100 houses is obliged to make 15% of those houses available for first-time buyers, affordable housing, and for those wanting to downsize. 85 of those houses are available for investment, and we think that that is quite wrong. That needs to be flipped. Secondly, releasing government land should not go to developers. They should go to Andium Homes or the Jersey Development Company, and that will increase the supply of affordable housing and first-time buyers into the market. I can't agree that we should form any kind of temporary housing. As previously mentioned, housing is a permanent problem. And Michael Van Nest, who formed the Jersey Homes Trust, said that essential for every family is a home. It is a human right. Unfortunately, it has never been at the forefront of previous governments' thinking. They have concentrated far too much on one particular sector, the finance sector, and they have allowed other areas of industry and other facets of our lives to wither on the vine.
Again, thank you very much indeed. Barbara, we come to you and ask a very similar question, which is about housing. How do we solve this housing problem? We clearly at the moment, whether we've got it right or wrong, and it's just that we've got an over demand, which is outstripping supply. How do we solve this?
Well, there's many facets, I think, to solving a housing crisis, as it was alluded, supply and demand. I think from can I just say about from a nurse's point of view, or hospital staff, I don't want to just focus on one group, is that, and I include agency staff in this as well. When agency staff come over, they are heavily subsidised in their accommodation. That's probably part of the deal. And it wouldn't be unreasonable that we actually look at the subsidies for people who are coming in, who don't know whether Jersey's the right place to be and whatever, and to know the actual facts of what it's like to actually rent accommodation in your own right outside that temporary accommodation. So I think people need to know exactly what they're coming into. Also, the health does have quite a lot of properties that it could actually refurbish. To take accommodation out of the housing stock like Hugh Court and Convent Court, when they've got properties like Westaway Court just lying there empty, you know, I couldn't understand why. On the other side about the housing, I think we are the result of about 4 or 5 years of private investors coming in and buying up our housing stock. Just from a profit point of view, I don't mind people making business, we need that. But when you've got people flying in the morning and then buying multiples of properties off plan and then flying out, they're looking at profits, they're looking at flipping, making good profits, and you're preventing our own people having the opportunity to buy those accommodation. You know, so it inflates the price. Because when you see 80% already sold, that's so devaluing to the person who's working so hard to save money to try and get that deposit. But then you're creating a blockage because you've got so many local people wanting to buy properties, but those properties are being sold.
Is that fact that off island buyers are? I see Lindsay shaking his head. Then I'll let you come in, Lindsay. Is that fact, or is that perception that is happening? Lindsay, what do you think?
A friend of mine was in a queue, and the person, they're at 3 o'clock in the morning queuing, and the person in front of them had bought 12 properties of a new development off plan, and it meant that 11 down the road would then be prevented because the properties have sold.
Okay, Lindsay, you can come in at that point there, because I can see the expression on your face.
Yeah, I can speak with some experience here, because obviously I deal with SOJDC and the Horizon development there, and a lot of people say, well, it's all Russians, isn't it? The Russians have bought the whole lot. No, they haven't. Overseas developers, as property speculators, they've bought the whole lot. No, they haven't. I think overseas purchasers of the Horizon, and it was actually stopped then after that, were 3% of the whole development. 3% was all it was overseas. Yes, other people have bought them in Jersey, but they are all local speculators, if you like, or people just putting pension money into a property, because we've seen a lot of that. This is what's happened when you can't put money in the bank because you're getting 0.5% if you're lucky. A lot of people have used their retirement funds to buy property and rent it out. And it's one of the reasons, of course, we have seen a property boom here, and of course in London and Singapore and various other areas, because people have to find a way to invest money that gives them a return, and that's what they've done. But as far as overseas people buying huge amounts of Horizon, etc., it just hasn't happened.
Ken, the Reform Party has been very much vocal on this and has brought propositions to the States in the last 4 years to try and inhibit this.
Yeah. I mean, putting it quite simply, we believe that the only people who should be entitled to buy a Jersey property, whether it's a 1-bed, 2-bed or a house, is someone who has Jersey residential qualifications.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
It's as simple as that.
Yes.
Housing should be built for people to live in, not as an investment vehicle. We are surely all entitled to a roof over our heads.
Yes. Yeah.
Philip, in terms of limiting the amount of housing purchase for speculation, for investment, should there be a cap on that? Should we limit that? We've got a housing shortage. This is probably not the time for those with a lot more wealth to be buying half a dozen properties.
Well, I agree. I don't think it is a time for those particularly outside the island to be encouraged to buy property for investment, because that does, as others have said, take away the opportunity for locals to buy their own property, or indeed to invest in property. Sure. And if you look at the manifesto of the JLC and Progress parties, you will see that one of the things we are going to do would be to consider the introduction of a withholding tax on the sales of residential property, including share transfer flats owned by non-residents. If you give notice to people who are non-residents who own flats that after a certain time they will be liable to a withholding tax, there's a very good chance that they're going to want to sell those properties and put them on the market, and because they're not going to be able to hold on to them and take the profit which they envisaged. And that will be extremely beneficial, I think, for the local market. There'll be a lot of flats coming on which local people will be able to buy.
Thank you. Alex, in terms of, I'll come to you in just a second, Barbara. In terms of attracting people back to Jersey and the attraction to come back to Jersey, you openly said, you know, you could see the attractiveness of Jersey, and frankly, I've worked in London as well, and I can see the attractiveness of getting back to Jersey as quickly as possible. But in terms of attracting people here, housing prices is certainly not going to attract people back and attract talent to the island. And that's what the economy is seeing at the moment, is we cannot attract people because a huge proportion of their wage is going to go on their rent, and certainly in most cases out of reach in terms of buying property.
Well, I mean, Philip just mentioned an example of, you know, a potential mechanism with a withholding tax to help get that price down. I moved back not because I wanted city life, but I enjoy what I consider some of the values of Jersey, which is the ability to go to the beach, the ability to enjoy our countryside, things that actually don't cost a lot of money. But if your housing costs a lot of money, you can't enjoy that. And if the housing isn't suitable, you probably won't enjoy living in a tiny flat. But I'll take Philip's example of kind of that kind of mechanism and say, it's all well and good applying it purely to foreign owners. What we want is the movement from an investment market to a housing market to shift. And maybe we have to look at expanding on an idea like Philip said and say, Should that apply to local material investors?
All right, we're going to, I think, leave housing there. I may well come to Barbara very quickly, because I know Barbara had raised a pen in, I want to say something. Barbara, you've got 30 seconds, and then we'll move subject. You're on mute, by the way, brother.
Yeah, the postman just arrived. Yeah, when I came 43 years ago, I was essentially employed. I had a piece of paper that said I had to be full-time for 10 years with the housing committee, and I could buy share transfer, but it was owner-occupier. Didn't do me any harm. You knew what the rules were. I know they were strict, but you weren't taking, you know, you had to live somewhere, but at least you could invest. And that was when I bought, was at 15% interest rate. So at the moment, the interest rates are so cheap. It's borrowing money is cheap compared to when in my day.
All right, I'm going to not move subjects in a massive go off a tangent, but run alongside housing, population, and the population policy that I understand we now have, or we're about to get, or we're close to getting, or we've taken the first steps to getting. Opinions range from this was the right thing to do to no, we should close the borders, to actually the population policy has been an 8-year fudge. So where are we with population, and what would you do if elected with our population? And you've been, I think, last on a couple of occasions, Barbara, so to be fair to you, I'm going to come to you first on this,
Okay.
on population.
In some ways, I've alluded to it for when I came. You know, it's a work permit. But in some ways, it gave you some security that you know you had a job for the next 10 years. And the housing ability actually went with that. It has come down, I think, to 5 years now. But I really think we should look at some of the benefits and the good things that we did some years ago. It's not a backward step. It's about control, about who's coming in. It's about that person having a good quality of life that can put a roof over their head, rather than keep changing staff, keep changing. I mean, it's that doesn't help.
Lindsay, we've got a policy that has a 9-month. We've got a policy that has a 4-year, so people don't achieve the 5 years that they need to move into entitled to work. So they continue to stay registered to work. They've got to leave the island. People employed in hotels, shoulder months are what everyone is trying to build the business around, so that they're not just operating for 6 months of the year, and yet they've got to say goodbye to their staff, and they've got to leave for 3 months in order to return again. Not exactly attractive. So where's this policy going?
I think, firstly, the population policy that was produced was a work in progress, and still is a work in progress. The trouble with the whole population issue is you can't please everybody, as you've already alluded to. And certainly the hospitality industry is short of people, and we need staff. There was a lot of talks about the population before the census, with people saying, oh, the real figure's more like 135,000 and we're swamped and we're like Hong Kong. That's by people, I think, who've never been to Hong Kong. But when you look at it, it actually went down to 103,000. And really what we need to do is stabilize the population where it is, because we cannot afford the population to plunge, because Guernsey had this problem. You suddenly end up with an aging population and very little way of financing it. So you need certain amount of inward migration, and all the businesses, particularly hospitality, retail, need that inward migration as well. I would have favoured some time ago to bring in a green card system. I think it has a lot going for it, including the fact that you could put in something that if you were arrested, you would lose the right to continue to reside here. But whether or not we can do that, I don't know now. You have so many human rights aspects to these things. But as I say, the population policy was always there as a discussion document and is flexible. It's not, I don't think when it was brought in, it was ever meant to be cut and dried. You know, this is it. This is the red line. I think it certainly can be maneuvered. And I think there's a lot of room within it to be maneuverable. That's
taken an awful long time, though, hasn't it? To even get to a working document. I mean, this is the working document that was the 2014-2018 government's document that was just being slightly rewritten, and we're in 2022 and we still haven't got a completed document. That's 8 years. whilst things have shifted. So there will be some question marks as to whether this last government has actually delivered that.
Well, it has delivered it, and it delivered it right towards the end of the term. You've got to remember, for 2 years we had the COVID situation to deal with as well, and a lot of the government civil servants were moved to deal with that problem. It was another one, as you said, took 8 years really, but we managed to deliver it right at the end. This government did. It's similar to getting the hospital, to planning. This is exactly what I was saying earlier. There was a lot actually achieved, and people say, oh, it took a while. Yes, it did take a while. It's a massive subject, as you said, and it can't just be done on a knee-jerk back of a cigarette packet. There was tremendous amount of consultation, as you know yourself, with the Chamber of Commerce, and then you have to look at the housing situation, and there was a lot of work put into that document. It wasn't just produced overnight, as you've said. Well, 8 years is the figure you were giving, so that was the length of time. But it was got over the line by Roland Hewlin when he picked the ball up, which was a difficult bouncing ball, but he took it and he got it over the line. So, as I say, it's still there very much for discussion, and I'm sure the other candidates will give their views.
Yes, I'm sure they will. 14 weeks of 3-hour meetings sitting on that board was time I'll never get back, I'm sure. So let's go to Ken Anderson. Ken, where does reform sit on population? Because businesses get very, very twitchy when political parties start getting concerned about population and limiting the amount of people that can come in.
So we can't solve the population problem without addressing the housing problem as well. The two are inextricably linked. For example, I was talking to a teacher from La Rocquia School. He said that when they advertise for a teacher, they will get 20 applications from the UK. As soon as the people get here, they look at how much housing is going to cost, either to buy or to rent, the cost of living, which is continuing to be more expensive, and they say, no thanks. What we would like to see is adopting a work permit system, which would bring in those that the island needs in terms of skills. And we would like to see us steadily reducing the amount of people that we bring in from the island by talking to people like yourselves, the Chamber of Commerce and local businesses, to find where the skills gaps are and to start bringing in suitable education policies. I think within education, we concentrate far too much on the academic side and on the finance industry. We need to look at apprenticeship schemes. We need to look at how we can encourage people to take on skills such as plumbers, electricians, carpenters, things like that. There's a whole range of measures that the government could do, but paramount in all of this is dealing with the housing issue.
Of course, the difficulty with the skills is some of the skills that we're short of are the skills that those who are coming through at a student level don't want to do. The example I could probably give is remembering a Michelin star restaurant that was offering an academy for trained chefs under a Michelin star chef. They offered 12 free places. They didn't get one applicant.
Wow.
So it's that whole leading the horse to water, and I mean that in the nicest possible way. Very difficult to sometimes find people for those skills. So Philip, how do we solve population? Because that's been around for a long time, and we're always told that it's going up and going up, but then our census is always out of date and seems a little bit inaccurate. So in terms of where we go from here as a population, what is your party's stance on the population?
Our party's stance, very simply, is that we would want to aim for stability. We would want to aim for a stable working population. That's not necessarily a stable population, but a stable working population, because we acknowledge the fact that people are getting older, and that there's a need for people to look after them. So it may be that the population will have to creep very slowly up, but the but the extent of the increases that we've seen in the last 20 years or so are completely unsustainable. It is an intractable problem because, as you have said and others have said, we have seen, in fact, the population shrinking over the last 3 or 4 years, 10 years, I'm sorry. The consequence of that has been that people are really concerned that they can't find the staff to service the businesses which they have. I think, although I agree that the current government took a long time to get there, but they are broadly speaking on the right track in producing a system whereby licenses are limited in time. Talking to the Hospitality Association, they've perhaps been limited too much, but that could certainly be tweaked in the future.
Alex, is our economy overheated in terms of we've got too many businesses? And I speak as the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce here, so it might be a rhetorical question.
Well, I was thinking, I was going to take the conversation that way in the sense that we need to look at the economy and the functions that the island needs to provide and understand what is a suitable size for each part of the industry. How many teachers does an island of 105,000 people need? How many healthcare staff? How many people who are able to work in infrastructure and construction? And until we have the data and we work with the data openly, and that's not the government siloing and hiding data, but the government working with business to understand what kind of economy do we want, we won't be able to find what sustainability and the stability that I think most of us all want. We don't want a growing population, but we need that to come out of data, and we need it to happen faster and start making decisions that allow us to test our theories. The population policy didn't provide us any levers or actions that I feel are really going to let us test the limits and start understanding if our hypotheses are correct. And so it's a bit of a can down the line. And I'd have liked to see something that, within a bounded risk, allowed us to understand what is the impact on allowing certain amount of immigration into certain industries.
Yeah, Lindsay, in terms of businesses, do you see businesses are going to go to the wall in the next 12 months in certain sectors? And I think now, without being alarmist, of certain industries such as hospitality, of retail, they can't get staff. They're now having to limit how many times they open. I mean, who'd have thought you'd have heard of pubs saying we're only open 5 days a week because we've got no staff for the other 2? Who'd have thought that you'd have had restaurants saying we'd love to open for the summer season, but we can't open every night to service the holiday makers that another part of the industry is working hard to bring in. So we have a serious problem in some industries. So what are we going to do about it?
It is a problem. Obviously, a lot of people have returned to Eastern Europe because things have picked up there, and the jobs are much easier to come and probably pay just as well as being here, maybe better. Coming back to your earlier point about the Michelin star chefs, that is a problem recruiting local people. I've spoken to hotels, and I'm sure you have, where they say that local people are fine, they want the job, but they don't want to work Friday evening or Saturday evening because they're out. And it's a common theme that is coming through from the younger people in the island, and I think that's a shame. Maybe we can offer more education within Highlands for the hospitality industry and push people more towards that. On your point on some of the pubs, I think some of the pubs are struggling for staff, some are not. Some are run from the UK, and they look at their figures and work out that it's perhaps better not to open on a Monday because of the cost factors. So that there's two stories to that going on. I think it is a very difficult problem, because if we say, yes, let's bring in loads of cheap labour from somewhere else, even if we can find it, there's your population going up again. As far as do we have too many restaurants and hospitality outlets, I don't think we do, to be honest. And if we're going to sustain the sort of tourism we want, which will be weekend and event-led tourism, people need restaurants to go to, and they will need beds, which is good that the Premier Inn are opening another one, and if they want to open another one, so further ones still would be brilliant, because we do need those beds, because at certain times we haven't got enough beds for these, particularly the sport-led tourism that's going on. So no, I don't think we have too many businesses. I hope that we come through this, and I hope that we can find more people coming here to work again. And in order to do that, we have to get a grip on the housing situation for temporary workers, which is what we were saying. And that's why I voted for a temporary solution to that, while we bought ourselves a bit of time over the next 4 years to do something permanently.
Philip Balash very much alluded to earlier the aging population and the difficulty with an aging population, in that the amount of people working and the amount of people not working, either too young or too old, that balance is just about to tip from the 50% to more people not in work than working. And that's not people unemployed, that's people retiring, people who've retired early, people who are still at school. That's all got to be paid for from somewhere. I'm going to go to Ken Addison from Reform here. How do we pay for an aging population? Because the inevitability it is, the Reform have always described population policy as a Ponzi scheme, in that you've got to keep adding more people to work in order to pay for the people that don't work. People, thankfully, and I'm in that group, are living longer. Let us all live an awful lot longer, but that costs money from the one pot that we have. Ken, how do we balance that? Because presumably we've got to keep growing the population.
You either have to keep growing the population, or you have to pay the living wage. And in Jersey, sadly, there are organizations that do not pay the living wage. And so is it therefore unsurprising that it's difficult for them to keep their staff? You mentioned this Michelin star initiative. I would ask the question, how much were those people going to be paid? Given the rise in cost of living, could they possibly take that job? It's all right saying that we don't have people who are willing to take low jobs, but does that pay mean that they will take a cut in their benefits? I mean, we have to have a living wage for people be able to have some standard of living. In terms of how can we raise more money, we have a policy to reform our taxation system. We get rid of 20 means 20. We put everybody on one rate, which would be the marginal rate less 1%, so 25%. The figures that we've got from Treasury is that this would provide an additional £6.5 million in taxation revenue. We propose to remove the social security cap on high earners. And so anyone who is paying an employee more than £250,000 a year, currently anything above that is free. There is no social security charge on that. We think that's wrong. We think it's just an arbitrary figure that's been plucked out of the air. The same goes for long-term care. Anybody earning above £250,000 doesn't pay any social security. Our view is, again, that appears to be an arbitrary figure. Those two alone would generate about £13 million in additional revenue. Okay. These aren't my figures. These are the figures that we've got from Treasury.
Okay, we've got 15 minutes left, and I think we've moved very much into a tax, housing, population, economy, tax. You can see where we're leading here. So putting tax up is the answer. Philip Balash, should we raise the tax? What's it going to do to the island?
Murray, I'll have to interject there.
Yep.
Because we're not putting up tax. We are making tax fairer. Our policy would mean that those on low income would have a small saving. Those on the middle income would either have a small saving or there would be no change at all. And it's only those on very high incomes who would be asked to pay slightly more. So we just need to be accurate on that point.
Okay, low, broad, and simple. I think they were describing me. Philip Balash.
I don't think I can let Ken get away with that. Of course, they're
I didn't think you would.
Reform Party are going to put up taxes. That's what they're all about. The point that Ken raises in relation to social security, though, is interesting because the social security contributions are calculated on the basis that the amount of money put into the scheme is sufficient to pay for the pensions of those who are participants at the end of the day. It's an insurance scheme. It's not a tax scheme. And what Ken is suggesting is that the social security scheme should be turned into some kind of a tax scheme so that there is no limit on the amount of contributions that are paid by those on very high incomes. That's an interesting proposition, but I don't want to express a view on it. But I certainly do want to say that so far as the JLC and the Progress parties are concerned, we would not put taxes up. We think that the better way of doing things is to reduce the expenditure of government. And that's something which has been going through the roof in the last 4 years and something that ought to be brought under control once more.
Could you save the 13.5 million that Ken was talking about by reducing expenditure on government?
I think that these things are have to be looked at. I think that that the trouble with raising taxes is that you get into very often a law of diminishing returns. In the United Kingdom, a government recently put the highest rate of tax up from 40% to 50%. And the consequence of that was that the amount of tax received by the revenue actually went down. And so you need to be practical about this. All
right. Barbara, you were very, very keen to come in there, so I'm going to let you come in.
Well, it was like watching, you know, the Ken and Philip show.
Well, that's why it's your turn now.
Right, the ageing population. When people, it's this misnomer, you know, oh, we're getting older, so that, you know, it's as if we're all suddenly we get our pension, we're on our Zimmer frames or in our wheelchairs. There's a lot of the older people that are retiring are on pensions. They've been contributing to pensions, you know, the new wave. So that they have got an income coming in, but also these people who may have been in high jobs, high-paying jobs, they still may want to work, maybe just part-time. They can come back into maybe a different industry in total, maybe work the Friday and Saturday nights that the youngsters don't want to work in hotels, because the older person or the more mature person, the person that's in their autumn years of their life, have got so many skills, people skills, that they can actually bring wisdom to some of those jobs and teach some of the younger ones coming up. So I really feel that the ageing population in some ways can be a positive thing, not a negative thing. Everybody sort of says it's all doom and gloom, you know, the younger are going to have to look after the older. In a lot of situations, it's the older person, the new era, that are actually still paying a lot of income tax where the younger ones aren't. So it may be that it's the older ones that are paying for the younger ones. But certainly they're still contributing to the long-term care, and a lot of us may not even see or be able to use that.
But of course, Barbara,
interesting.
And I don't decry anyone who is, and I regard myself in this category as well, in their 60+ years.
Yes.
Yeah, all right, Alex. but in terms of that, the healthcare and medical care, it is absolutely well known that those costs rise with age, and those costs have got to be met. How do we square that circle, Lindsay, when it comes to the aging population? I tread very carefully in that I was once criticised for saying people live longer, and I mean it in a very positive way. But if we've got less people working and more people not working, that doesn't balance up very well.
No, absolutely. And that's what we were discussing earlier when we discussed population. But you do have to be careful. And when we come back to the national insurance situation or social security payments, And Sir Philip was absolutely right. Reform are about raising taxes, and they raise taxes in one area to give back in another. In fairness to them, they aim to raise that money off the very highest earners and take GST off food. But if you take GST off food, there is no guarantee whatsoever that 5% will be passed on, none at all. In fact, in the UK, we've seen with petrol, it hasn't been on many occasions, and that's 20%, so it's very different. And two, of course, taking GST off food actually benefits people who are spending an awful lot on food and not the poorest in society. So it's a bit of a misnomer. The other problem of when you go after your highest earning people, that's fine. The Labour Party did this in the 60s and 70s in the UK. You go after your highest earning people, then you find you haven't quite got enough money, so you go after your less than high earning people. And in the end, you have to go after everybody just to get enough money to keep things going. So it's a very slippery slope when you start off on this. Don't worry about it, chaps. We're only going to tax the really, really well off. You're all fine. Because in the long term, you won't be fine.
But of course, taking GST off food is broad, and you never know who it's going to affect. It's kind of a bit like giving people £100 on a credit card and tell them to go out and spend it. But then that seemed perfect anyway. But then I'm playing devil's advocate, Lindsay, as you know.
That was a very, as you know, it was a very different thing because one, when you take GST food, we don't know it'll be passed on. With the £100, we knew they had to spend that money locally in shops and stores and wherever they could. They couldn't spend it online. They couldn't spend it in the bookies because I checked. It really did provide a fantastic boost, not only to the economy, but to individuals themselves. And you've got to remember, Murray, we were giving taxpayers back their money. We weren't going out and spending that money for them. We were giving the taxpayer back that money.
Oh, I think we're going to be talking about GST on food in a minute. Alex, I'm going to let you come in because you've not had a say on this. And Ken, I'm going to come back to you in a second. I know you want to speak. But Alex, in terms of tax, have we got tax about right? Do we need to adjust our tax, and who do we need to tax?
Well, we need a tax system that's fair, that income across a wide range of money made in a wide range of incomes is taxed fairly. And I think our property market is proof that right now that might not be the case. It comes to spending more, like spending less, like Philip said, and making sure we are an efficient government. But it's also knowing, are we collecting enough? And the books have to balance. And as Philip said, Social Security is a system where we take in to pay out. And I don't know if the numbers are currently stacked in the way to create a sustainable Social Security fund.
Okay.
But we need that data.
Thank you.
Sorry, can I just?
Yes, you can, Ken.
Make a couple of points. Your question was, how do we pay for an aging population? The two measures that I've mentioned, removing the Social Security cap and the long-term care cap, will help to provide additional £12 million in the Social Security fund. That's one way of doing it. Lindsay's point about removing GST from food may not always be passed on to the end recipient is a valid point. You cannot legislate for unscrupulous suppliers. But GST is an invidious tax. It is disproportionate. It affects those on low and fixed income more than those on a higher income. And as for spending on food, well, you would expect people to spend their money on food. If you don't spend money on food, you'll starve. So some of the remarks I find I just have to disagree with.
Okay, well,
just find one final point. Reform did bring forward a proposition to have GST removed from food, and the Alliance-led government defeated that proposition. And it is sad to say that the two current deputies of St Clement voted against the proposition.
All right. We have 5 minutes left if we're very, very lucky. And I think we've moved to GST, and Guernsey are currently wrestling with the idea of even introducing GST, and in fact, still wrestling with the idea of charging for parking. So they're finding very grave difficulty in raising taxes within their island. We're here to talk about ours. In the remaining 1 minute each, GST, should we remove it or not? It will affect businesses within Jersey one way or another. So Barbara, I'm going to start with you, if I may. If you had the opportunity and the power to be able to either keep GST as it is or to remove GST on certain items, would you do so?
I think we've got to look at the situation that people are experiencing now. The people who are just, the older person who's just on a pension, or people who are on income support, every single penny counts. If you take GST, it will really help the people on low incomes, the people who are at home, who've got looking after the children. It may not be that we actually remove it permanently, but I think we could look at a pause to help people now. It's either that or we have to give them some supplement cash so they can live.
Supplement cash or a pause on GST on food is what you're saying, yes?
Yes, I think yes.
Jolly good. Alex, you've been asked a couple of times, so I'm coming to you next on this. A GST pause, a GST reduction, food, what do you think?
I would say that if we're going to start looking at applying GST to certain items or not, we need to go back and review the purpose that GST exists in the first place, as it is a dangerous slope. And I wouldn't necessarily want to see us go down a route in which we zero rate some items, but move to a 20% or 10% style of GST that we see other places, because we'd have to cost if the impact of increasing GST on other areas would actually have a detrimental impact on the people we're trying to help. I'm not in favour at the same time, though, of nurturing a needs-based economy, and I'd prefer that we make sure that the economy is fair, so most people can access the services and the food and the housing they need without support from the government, but we are still there to help those who do need our help.
Okay, Lindsay, I think I know what you're going to say here, given your voting record on it, but GST on food, why can't we do a pause on this? Why can't we help people?
For a lot of the reasons that Alex just said, we would, if we were to do that, we may well then have to look at putting up GST in other areas. You have to remember that GST is not like the UK's VAT. VAT is value added tax. So it's basically, VAT was brought in for luxury goods, hence the rate it's normally levied at. This is just a goods and sales tax right across the board. It's very easy to administer. It's easy to understand. And once you start moving things around, it becomes more complicated for the retail trade for a start. It becomes more complicated for the tax office to administer. And you probably start to then have much more paperwork flying around, and bureaucracy again goes through the roof. It's a very simple tax, and it applies to everybody right across the board, and it's at 5%. We're not talking 20% like VAT. It was one of probably the best thing Jersey did to bring in. It's one of the reasons, one of the many reasons, because there was a lot of good things done, that we have tremendous reserves in place, whereas other countries do not, who have avoided making the tough moves that we made some time ago.
Okay, Ken, I know you've had your say pretty much on this, but really, really quickly, because I can come to Philip. I will come to you, Philip. So Ken, GST, would you remove it completely off everything, or would you just take it off food?
No, 2 points. The government has already removed GST from certain products, from sanitary products, and therefore it is an easy thing to do. We advocate that GST is removed from all food.
Okay, thank you for that. Philip, you get the last word on this one. As far as GST, and I don't want to revisit the Jaffa cakes.
It's not an easy thing to do, and the Jaffa cakes are one very good example. And there are all kinds of areas. What is food? And the beauty of GST at the moment is that it is so simple to administer. The tax office finds it easy, the trade finds it easy, and it raises for the island 80 or 90 million pounds a year. Now, if you're going to take it off food, despite adding, as well as adding complications, you need to increase the amount of GST on everything else in order to raise the same amount of tax for the exchequer. That's not sensible. And one thing that Ken has not mentioned, which is really important, is the community bonus, which helps people on low incomes and was introduced precisely for the reason that it was recognized that poorer people might find it difficult to pay the GST on food.
Thank you all very much indeed. We've run out of time. That's an hour and a quarter that's gone by blissfully very quickly, and with some good points being made. I wish you and the other candidates who couldn't make the hustings today the very best with the election that's coming up. There are 4 seats available in St Clement, and the Chamber of Commerce will be looking forward to working with each or all or many of you once the election has happened. We wish you the very best. Thank you for joining us today, and don't forget that we watched back time and time again on the Jersey Chamber of Commerce YouTube channel once we've uploaded it. Thank you very much and good morning.
Thanks, Mary. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye.